Crisis Intervention Team initiative. And so today I'm going to go over exactly what that is, our role here at United Way, and how so many of our partners help us facilitate this amazing initiative. Throughout the presentation, I'll be looking through the chat box. So if you have any questions, I tend to talk really fast. So if I need to slow down, just shoot me a message and I will take a deep breath and pause. So I don't want to be speaking to you just for the next 20 minutes. So I welcome all types of questions, and no question is silly. So I encourage you to engage in conversation via chat. Catherine, if I missed a question, just, kind of jump in and pause me for a brief second. All right, perfect. So I am going to share my screen. So just give me a few seconds. Can everyone see my screen? Give me a thumbs up. Perfect. Awesome. All right, so again, so we coordinate the county's crisis intervention team. So we have about maybe 20 to 25 crisis intervention teams across the state. And so our United Way manages the team for Broward County. Play a quick video, give you a brief.
Law enforcement officers are dedicated. Every day they put on a uniform and deal with everything from pesky kids on skate. Law enforcement officers are dedicated. Every day they put on a uniform and deal with everything from pesky.
Sorry about that, guys.
Law enforcement officers are dedicated. Every day they put on a uniform and deal with everything from pesky kids on skateboards to bank heists. And while officers always strive to do their best, sometimes they encounter situations more suited for social workers, like dealing with mental health crisis calls, which is why we have crisis intervention teams. C.I.T. programs teach law enforcement officers how to safely de-escalate mental health crisis situations. In fact, law enforcement agencies that have C.I.T. programs in place have reported as much as an 80% decrease in officer injuries during mental health crisis situations. Not only do C.I.T. programs educate officers, they also bring together community members and mental health care providers to offer convenient options for treatment and to reduce the number of repeated calls for police service, saving officers valuable time. Take the next step in helping your community better respond to mental health crisis calls. Learn more about C.I.T. programs by visiting NAMI.org/CIT.
So that was a brief overview of C.I.T. So the history of C.I.T. So in Memphis, Tennessee, around the 80s, there was an officer-involved shooting with an African-American male. And the city of Memphis went into an uproar. And so there were a couple of findings. The major at that time, Major Cochran, really did a fantastic job and said, we are going to hold ourselves accountable. We're going to look at all the facts and see what transpired in this incident. So a couple of things came out of it. They realized that the gentleman that was shot had a mental illness, and he was in a full psychosis, a full psychotic break. And so as a result, the community asked the department, why doesn't your officers or your agency, why aren't they familiar with mental health issues? And so this built a partnership with their local NAMI, and our community has a NAMI as well, which is the National Alliance of Mental Illness. And so out of this incident, the crisis intervention team model was birthed. So the idea of this initiative is to really work with community mental health providers and experts and law enforcement to kind of help build bridge the gap between both agencies. So C.I.T. came to Broward County and Fort Lauderdale. And so Fort Lauderdale PD took Captain Scott Russell, who is also an active partner with C.I.T., traveled to Memphis, Tennessee, participated in a week-long training to bring it back to Fort Lauderdale PD. And then, so for a couple of years, they were the only agency that really participated in this initiative. And then all of our other local municipalities started to participate. And then in 2016, because of the work that we do under our commission, the managing entity decided to award United Way with the funding to facilitate this initiative. So since 2016, your local United Way has taken on this initiative and enhanced it in multiple ways. And later on throughout the presentation, I'll talk about what those enhancements look like that we've implemented since we've taken over the initiative. So your local United Way has trained over 1,000 officers and deputies in Broward County. And that is inclusive of correctional staff, so deputies that are working in our jail system. So what is the purpose of C.I.T? Obviously, it's to enhance officer and citizen safety. So in the quick little video in the beginning, I'm not sure if you heard it, but one of the amazing stats from C.I.T or any communities that decide to operate as C.I.T is that we see a decrease in officer injury and also an increase in citizen safety. And then what's most important to us is just the access, increasing the access to behavioral health services, and then linkage to other behavioral health services or organizations. So C.I.T is a week-long training. So we work with our municipal agencies, and so they're in class for 40 hours. And so our classes rotate. Sometimes we have the sessions at United Way at our building. So it's interesting when they come over, we say that we're probably the safest place in the county. So just imagine the 30 to 40 law enforcement vehicles at United Way. And other times we rotate them through the different agencies, so they'll host. So maybe a BSO will host a class 1 month, or Fort Lauderdale Police. And then some of our behavioral health providers also serve as hosts for the week-long training. So I'm gonna go over sort of briefly what the training looks like. And then if you have any questions, please make sure that you kind of pause. So education on mental illness and signs and symptoms. So we focus on illnesses that they're more likely to encounter. And so we talk about depression, anxiety disorders. I think Aisha spoke to you all last week about specific mental health diagnoses. We also talk about PTSD, which is a subset of an anxiety disorder. Then we focus on crisis communication, de-escalation. In the next slide, I'll go over that in detail. And then we highlight special populations. So Broward County is a majority minority community, meaning that we have more minorities in this community. And so it's important for us, through the lens of equity, for us to focus on those special populations. So we have a segment where we specifically focus on veterans and their unique needs and unique challenges, elderly issues. So we know that South Florida, specifically our community, is where the rest of the country is heading as far as the population of elderly individuals. So we focus on dementia, Alzheimer's, how that may impact their interaction with law enforcement, and then on LGBTQ issues. So we have a very large, unique LGBTQ community here. So it's really important that our officers practice some sort of cultural humility or cultural competency when providing services to individuals who identify as an LGBTQ member. And then we also have a 2.5, 3-hour block focused on autism. In the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more on what that particular piece of the training looks like. And then there's actual scenario-based training. So this is what we call role plays, and officers have an opportunity to actually practice the skills that they learned earlier in the week. And in a couple of slides, you'll see, I'll share 2 scenarios that we often go over with some of the officers. And then the last day of training is really about collaboration. So we know when officers really have really healthy, open line communication with the providers in our community, then they're more likely to make the necessary referrals to services. So this program is not only meant to create officer safety, citizen safety, but we really hope that at the end, that officers will help us reach individuals that normally don't interact with our behavioral health care system. So how we focus on crisis communication. So this is the model that we use. It is FBI, was created by the FBI crisis negotiation unit. And so this is what we've implemented in our C.I.T. initiative. If you look across the country, they may use a different model, but we've chosen to use this FBI crisis negotiation initiative because just it's evidence-based. We find that it works. So for this particular segment, we work with our C.I.T. trained officers who are crisis negotiators. And so they have an expertise in this. So this is very important to our piece, to our part of the training. So we go over active listening skills. Really, how do you listen to someone in a crisis? How do you listen to someone in a crisis is going to be very different than you and I having a conversation. And then we focus on building empathy. So what we find is that your average citizen is very unfamiliar with what a behavioral health diagnosis may look like, how someone may present. So we really focus on building empathy throughout this piece. And one of the ways that we focus on building empathy is that there's an entire segment that's focused on officer self-care and officer wellness. So the data shows us that officers are more likely to die by suicide than the general public. And so when officers walk into our classroom and we share with them those statistics, it makes them more empathetic because now they see themselves and the people that they're providing services to. We talk about how to build rapport, then hopefully influence the change. So we want to influence behavior change, whether that is that person going into the officer vehicle without any issues, or leaving the store because they're being disruptive. So one of the special populations I wanted to focus on today is our autism piece. So if you look at the picture, that is Robert, him and his mom, Teresa. I love them. Every Friday, they come and do their piece of the training. It's about 2.5, 3 hours. Robert is a young man who's on the spectrum. He's 22, he's nonverbal. And so in the class every Friday, I have no idea what's going to happen. Robert he does what he wants to do. And so it's always fun to have him in the class. But what's unique about this particular part of the training is that Robert and the officers have an opportunity to really work together. So officers get to practice, how do I communicate with someone who is nonverbal, right? So if they're out on the scene and they need an individual, a child, to move, how do I direct that child? Or how do I get that person to listen to the directives that I have, knowing that this person is nonverbal? So they have an opportunity to work with Robert. So he's helped trained about, I would say, about 800 of our officers in the community. And this is probably one of the most impactful parts of the class because they get to use their skills right away. So I love Robert. Robert and his Teresa, I appreciate them. They come every Friday to the training, and they drive all the way from Coral Gables to Broward County to make sure that our officers have this unique opportunity to work with someone who's on the spectrum and who is nonverbal. Also during this training, another couple of things I wanted to highlight is that when someone is on the spectrum, we know that sirens can send them into a seizure. So that's one of the important pieces that we talk about. We also talk about how children on the spectrum tend to be attracted to water. So we also provide officers with information on how to connect parents to free swimming lessons. So, because we know kids who are on the spectrum are more likely to die because of drownings. So we connect them to services, so then they can connect the families that they provide services to these important services in the community. So I'm going to read I have a couple of examples for you all. These are real life scenarios that we go over in class. And so I'll just read them out to you and then talk about maybe what that looks like and what I look for and some of our providers look for when we do this piece. So you are called out to a 60-year-old Vietnam veteran with a history of numerous psychiatric hospitalizations at the VA hospital in Miami. He is homeless. He also has a history of alcohol abuse. Today, he became involved in an altercation at a local convenience store with the store clerk who is Asian. The subject has never been willing to accept help from the VA. He says he feels abandoned by the US government. So in this particular scenario, one of the things that we look for when the officers are working on using the skills that they learn throughout the week, we really look for how is the officer building empathy, what resources outside of the VA system that they can refer to clients. If a veteran is saying, I don't want to go through the VA, but there are other programs or other organizations who serve veterans, and how can we get that officer to connect that individual to services. We look for making sure that the officer at the last resort uses any form of physical contact, because again, we want to increase officer safety and citizen safety. So another real life scenario, this is what Lighthouse PD is, someone who is, the subject purchased a large quantity of rat poison. The subject left to the store, and then after a few minutes returned to the store and asked the sub person how much a rat poison is required to kill a rat of his or her size. Police have already taken the poison of the rat purchased by the subject. The subject is mildly tearful with flattened facial expression. The subject says he or she won't commit suicide. So we know that in our particular community, police often Baker Act, at least over 50% of their Baker Acts are committed by police. And we also know that oftentimes they are the ones who are called on attempts of suicide and completions of suicide. So it's really important for us, and especially with our suicide initiative, that officers can see the signs of someone who is suicidal, connect the person to services, and then if they're practicing community policing, meaning this is a particular part of the community that they're always providing services to, or they're there on a consistent basis, it's important for us that they build relationships, and whether that is just stopping by that person's neighborhood and making sure that they are connected to services. So these are just two examples, and I gave you the easy ones. I didn't want to scare anyone because some of the scenarios that we have are really tough to hear. So I hope none of these weren't triggering for anyone, but I try to be careful and mindful of the scenarios that we share. And all of the scenarios that they practice are real life examples of what was shared to either myself or some of the providers that we work with. So who are the participating agencies? Coral Springs, Coconut Creek, Davie, Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, Lauderhill, Lighthouse Point, Plantation, Sunrise, and Wilton Manors, and then of course, BSO. So the only agencies that are not participating in our current CIT at this time are Margate Police Department, but every single other agency, inclusive of Seminole Police Department, which I don't have on here, is participating in our agency. So Seminole Police Department is a little unique because they service the Hard Rock and then also tribal land in Broward County. A couple of months ago, the Seminole Police Department gave us, myself and my colleague Aisha, a tour of the new Hard Rock, which was amazing. But one of the things that they talked about that they're concerned about because of the new building is the increased likelihood of people dying by suicide or attempting suicide at that Hard Rock. So we work with them to talk about what are some of the unique, maybe unique strategies that they can implement at that particular facility to help deter people from dying by or attempting suicide at Seminole Hard Rock. So this is a large network. So United Way, we are the managing portion. So we coordinate all of the training, but it really can't happen without some of our amazing partners. So NSU provides some expertise. So Dr. Ray, he does an entire segment on pharmacology. It's important for police officers to know that just how psychotropic meds work, how they may interact. So if they have someone Baker acted and that person, is starting their meds, we need police officers to understand that, the meds may not be effective until maybe 4 to 5 weeks, 6 weeks down the line. So they need to be able to explain that to the family member that, yes, I know your son or daughter just, started to take meds and you don't see a change in their behavior, but give it some time because we know psych meds take at least 45 weeks to start to work through the body. NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness, they're a partner. South Florida Wellness Network, they participate in the peer panel that occurs at the end of the week. So every Friday we have individuals with lived experience, meaning they have either a substance abuse and or a mental health diagnosis, and they come and talk about what it's like to live in recovery. So they also talk about the good, the bad, ugly interactions with law enforcement and how law enforcement can be of a help and assistance when they're in their crisis. And then BOC, which is the Broward Outreach Center, on Wednesdays, officers actually leave the classroom and they go to our providers. We do this in an effort to help them build relationships with our providers. So they get to see or get a tour of how programs are operated, how a client can be referred to services. So then when they're in the community, they can help make the linkage. And then obviously we work with VA. VA actually also has a police department. So we've trained all of their police, we've trained their entire police department at VA, including actually Broward and Miami because the main VA is in Miami. Henderson Behavioral Health is also a big partner in this. West Care, which is formerly known as Susan B. Anthony, officers have an opportunity to go there on Wednesdays to do a tour. This particular facility provides long-term residential care to women and children. And women, they have to have a substance abuse disorder to be part of this residential treatment program. So officers get an opportunity to go to the facility, meet some of the women there and their children. And then so now when they're back on the road working, if they encounter a woman who maybe has a substance abuse disorder, they can help make the connection. Mental Health Association and Nine Muses. Nine Muses is probably one of my favorite organizations. They are on Oakland Park Boulevard. It's an art space. And so it's a place where individuals who have a mental health diagnosis or maybe love someone who has a mental health diagnosis, they can go there and just network, and it's sort of like a family. And so they actually even have art shows there, so it's Nine Muses. Officers really love that place. And so they use that place. Maybe someone is not in a crisis and they don't need to be Baker acted, but they need support. And so officers can drop off individuals to Nine Muses. And then Fort Lauderdale Behavioral Hospital, I highlighted them because recently they opened their, what we call their hero wing of the hospital. So earlier I mentioned how first responders are more likely to die by suicide than the general population. So because of the work that they do, they experience vicarious trauma. And so it's important for them to have a safe space. So Fort Lauderdale Behavioral Hospital has a specialized unit for veterans and for first responders. So if an officer in the classroom realizes that maybe his partner is in a crisis himself or herself, and they maybe need to be Baker acted, well, this is a safe place that they can be Baker acted without having to have civilian interaction. And then SunServe is a big partner as well, and they come in and they do the special training piece on LGBTQ issues. So our C.I.T network is large and vast. And I just highlighted just our main partners. I can probably have another 2 to 3 slides with just all of the agencies that are connected to our CIT network. And that is it for me. If you have any questions, please, I would love to hear them.
Yes, if anybody wants to type your questions into the comment section, I'd be happy to read them off. I'll go ahead and start because I have a question for you, Elkin. So for somebody out in the community, how would you identify police officers who have been through this training so that you know which officers are the person to speak with?
Oh, great question. So when officers complete the training, they receive a CIT pin. It's a gold pin if they're with BSO, and platinum, silver if they're with the other policing agencies. And so we actually, part of CIT, we go into the community and we train family members on how to request a CIT officer. So if a family is experiencing a crisis, they can call their local police and say, hey, I have an issue here. I would like to request a CIT trained officer, and then that officer would come to the home and the family member would be able to identify that officer based on the CIT pin that they have.
Thank you. That's very good to know. So that way everybody can spread the word about that so you can know, can let others know about it as well. Does anybody else have a question that they'd like to ask Elkin? Okay. This has been wonderful. I can't thank you all enough for, okay. Rhea has a question. Does CIT training support include other languages since our community is so diverse?
Yes, so I didn't mention, but I do a unconscious bias segment throughout the entire week. And so we focus on the fact that our community is very diverse. And so it's important for our officers to understand that culturally, how people communicate will be very different. So an example that I like to give and share with them is that I'm Haitian American. And so growing up, for me, it was considered very disrespectful to look an adult in the eye. So while someone who's American can look at that and assume that maybe I'm not being truthful, for me as a young child, I was trying to be as respectful as possible. So we do talk about how, based on that person's cultural and ethnic background, that how they communicate may give us a false impression of how that person feels. So we do have a piece on that focuses on, building cultural competency, cultural humility. And we focus on language barriers too. So our departments, I think every single department has a couple of individuals, obviously individuals who speak Spanish and then individuals who speak Haitian Creole.
Thank you, Elkin. Great question. And does anybody else have a question? Okay. We have some awesome people on here. I see some new Next Gen United donors who have started joining these calls. Thank you so much.
Hey, I put a couple questions in the queue.
Can you see them, Elkin?
No, I don't see them.
Oh my God, I'll jump in just for a quick second. I put them in the chat room. One is, how do we get every officer to participate? And then the second question was, I know lots of officers are assigned to go to our CIT training, but can you talk a little bit about how they react once they go through the training?
Oh, great question. So our community has decided to have the train all model, which is very unique. CITs across the country are usually where they have a specialized unit. So all of our agencies have jumped on board to train all of their officers. Second part of your question, may you repeat that again, Kathleen?
Yeah, sorry, Elkin, I'm just driving out of this volunteer activity, but my second part was, I do know a lot of officers are what we call voluntold to go or assigned to attend the training. Can you talk a little bit about after they go and the week-long training, how they kind of come to appreciate the training, even though they were told and they didn't volunteer to go themselves?
Oh, great question. So, yeah, so the first day is usually the roughest day. Many of them have been voluntold, but by Tuesday afternoon, they're all in. And so I start off each training being very honest with them about what the week is going to look like. And I find that when I open up and really talk about how this is the information that they're learning this week is going to be applicable to their family members, to people that they work with, then I have buy-in. And by Friday, they're saying to me, I wish I had this 15, 20 years ago in my career. So many of the officers, they've been policing communities for 20 plus years, have never really had a comprehensive training on mental health and or the resources that are available to the people that they are policing. So at the end of the week, I would say 95 to the 99%, because there's always that one, but majority of them are very thankful and they say, I wish we had this early on in our careers.
Thank you.
I'm trying to see if there are any other questions in the queue. I think we got to the other two. If I did not see your question and it is in the queue, if you would like to, can we unmute ourselves? I think we can unmute ourselves. Brooks, can you test that out real quick? Can you unmute yourself right now?
How does that work?
Okay, yeah, so anybody who needs to unmute themselves to ask a question, you may do so if I missed your question in the queue. Here's one from Aisha. Elkin, can you speak about the diversity and equity information that you share with C.I.T. officers?
Sure. So Aisha, you can speak on this as well. So the piece we have activity that we'd like to do is an intersectionality activity. And so we get officers to look at themselves through the diversity lens. And so once they do that, they see how the multiple identities that we all hold, how they intersect and how that may play a role in the services that we receive, right? So we know that often communities of color often have a difficult time accessing behavioral health services. And when they do access behavioral health services, how they're treated by their provider makes them less likely to go back to services. So we focus on that. We also talk about how their own biases may impact how they provide services to someone. Who are they more empathetic to because there's a shared identity with, or who are they less empathetic with because they don't necessarily see or feel the commonality.
Great. Do you have anybody else? I'll give it a few seconds in case you're typing right now. If anybody's typing, I would like you to have your opportunity to ask your question.
Hey guys, this is Kathleen again. So a lot of times we think of officers only for law enforcement, but there's so many so much of what they do is community engagement, community building. They actually give grants, they participate in charity events, all types of things. So one of the great things that Elkin does in our C.I.T. training is try also to communicate to the community that officers, whether sheriff or police departments, are community builders as well. We don't always think of them that way. We think of them as enforcement. And if we, our own biases, unconscious biases, if we can switch that a little bit as well and see them as, like I said, community builders, engagers, stuff like that, I think that's an important piece as well. So just wanted to chime in on that. And I'm really proud of Elkin and the C.I.T program at United Way. A lot of people don't know that we do that training for officers. Again, we are trying to fill gaps everywhere in the community, and want to build this community that everybody thrives here in Broward County. So again, just wanted to say how proud I was of Elkin.
Thank you, Kathleen. And yes, we are blessed. We have an amazing group of men and women who choose to serve. And so during lunch, we provide lunch for the officers, but they do have the opportunity to leave, but majority of them stay. And so the lunch conversations that I have with them are just amazing. They're amazing human beings, and I've learned so much throughout this period just working with law enforcement. And so I hear stories of officers saying, oh, I purposely carry a basketball in the trunk of my vehicle because sometimes I'll just stop and I'll shoot hoops with, the kids in their neighborhood. Or officers who at the schools have decided to start leadership clubs with the students that they work with. And so the men and women who choose to serve in our Broward community, because that's a community that I can speak for, it's just not enforcing the law. They're really passionate about building good rapport with their the people that they provide services to. So much so, one of the officers, I'm a deputy actually for BSO, he provides services to this particular community that's sort of high in crime. And one of the things he said to me, he said, everything you're saying in this class makes perfect sense, because I find that the people that I've built rapport with, they'll call me. And if there's a concern that I have or an issue that I have, they help me in making sure that the community stays as safe as possible. So yeah, we are blessed. All of our agencies are really doing some really good work around advancing community policing and really changing what that looks like.
Great, Elkin. Anybody else have any questions? Thank you all so much for joining us today. Again, thank you all for your support. Those of you who have joined our groups, Next Gen United, Women United, Tocqueville Society, your gifts are making a huge difference out in our community. Thanks, everybody. And we also have our COVID-19 campaign that is up. So if you have anything to donate there, it would be greatly appreciated. We are supporting the community with emergency financial assistance, as well as feeding those in the elderly population, the children who were getting their meals from school, the veterans that were fed today. So we're making a big impact out there through our COVID-19 fund as well. So you can find that on the website. We will also have our next upcoming webinar information out very soon. I did also want to let you know other ways to participate are to join our challenges online. You can go onto social media and do a hashtag Stay Home Broward photo, show a picture of you holding the sign that you can find on our United Way of Broward County page, showing what you're doing right now while you're staying at home, encouraging others to stay in as well. And then we also have a really fun one that's our hashtag United Way Storytime. Grab a children's book that's under 5 minutes, put on your United Way of Broward County shirt, and read while you're live streaming. Make sure you hashtag United Way Storytime and tag us at United Way Broward. So that way we can make sure we collect all these stories so all of our children can have somebody else reading to them as well. I'm sure my children are tired of hearing me read to them. So I do refer to these videos so that way they have somebody else that shows them that it's important to other people that they read as well. So these are just some other fun ways to get involved. If you have any questions, reach out to me. I'm happy to help best they can. And we look forward to seeing you at the next United Way of Broward County Lunch and Learn on Wednesday. So thank you all so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, do I need to end?
It was really good, guys.
Thanks.